This is the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusive ScottishVisits.co.uk.
Hello, this is John Harbour, and welcome to Unique Scotland, the podcast from my website exclusive.ScottishVisits.co.uk. I'm speaking to you from Helensburgh today. It's about 25 miles northwest of Glasgow and sits on the River Clyde. And it's raining cats and dogs today with gale-force winds. And I can see the Clyde estuary from my window, and the water is churning into white horses as I record. Well, with only over a week to go to September, is this really the end of summer in Scotland? I can already hear some of you saying, hell no, it wouldn't be Scotland if it wasn't raining. Well, fair point. This podcast takes us back to the mainland from the Isle of Skye, then over to Fort William. There's actually two perspectives of this podcast, as I will be dropping off my guests in Mallaig to join the Hogwarts Express train, the steam train that took Harry Potter on his first journey to Hogwarts, whilst I drive on to Fort William to await their arrival. I will also talk about Glenfinnan, the first landing place of Bonnie Prince Charlie on his quest to take back the British crown for his father, James VIII. Well, if you're new to my podcasts, I try to share with you an experience, albeit virtually, of the real Scotland, its people, its customs and traditions, and some of the amazing places to visit. And there are many. Castles, palaces, or the beautiful landscapes amongst the mountains and the glens. What I try to do on these virtual journeys is to share with you all that Scotland has to offer. And if you intend to visit this wonderful country at some stage in the future, then perhaps your tour might be shaped by some of what you discover here. Thank you, by the way, to the listeners who have got in touch. And can I just say to Maisie from Philadelphia that the skirt you're referring to is actually called a kilt. And to Jim from Oklahoma, who asked if I live in a castle, all I can say, Jim, is that every man's home is his castle. And to Trent from New York, who asked if we all still hate the Campbells for their part in the Glencoe massacre that I told you about in my previous podcast, well, Trent, the story has not been forgotten, but after 300 years, I think we have forgiven them. Whatever way you intend to enjoy Scotland, then I hope that by listening to this podcast and viewing my monthly video podcast, you get a feel for what this magical land of the Scots has to offer. In my previous podcast, I introduced you to the wonderful world of whisky, ending up at home with the legend that is Charles MacLean, Scotland's top whisky expert. And Charles gave us his view on the whisky industry and how it has been affected by COVID-19. He also gave us a virtual tasting of the amber nectar, which was most enlightening, especially his own favourite tipple. And you can listen to the back copies now at exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk or on other media channels under my Unique Scotland brand. My very last podcast was actually the letter from Scotland, an insight into the stories that are making headlines in the small but beautiful land we call Scotland. My main question in that podcast was, if there's Scottish blood running through the veins of Donald Trump, then why is he sucking the lifeblood out of Scotland? Listen to the full piece in my last podcast, Letter from Scotland. So I'd now like you to relax wherever you are and thoroughly enjoy this, the third series of your Unique Scotland tours from Skye to Fort William. Wherever you are in the world and whatever you're doing, I raise my glass to you with the traditional Gaelic Scottish toast, Slanjava. Well, it's 9 a.m. and having breakfasted at the wonderful Kinloch Lodge, it's time to depart for the ferry terminal to take us back to the mainland. We stayed in one of the lodge rooms with sea views, and the view down Loch Nadal was superb. We'd arrived the previous afternoon, enjoyed a cream tea, and I took advantage of a fishing rod that was supplied by the hotel to while away an hour before dinner by the loch. Clearly, the fish around Skye are wily creatures, and none took my bait, but it was so good to enjoy a tranquil moment in the superb surroundings of Kinloch's estate by the sea. Kinloch Lodge is a gem of a boutique hotel with a Michelin-starred restaurant to die for, with the renowned Marcel Tully as the head chef. Yesterday evening I enjoyed a main meal of slow-cooked wild venison stew with bacon, herbs and red wine, served with a potato gratin and buttered carrots. And for dessert I had a rhubarb and orange crumble with coconut milk ice cream. Just superb. The hotel is a 16th century former hunting lodge of the MacDonald family and sits on the shores of Loch Nadal, and that's what makes it so special. It will be sad to leave, and I would have loved to have lingered, but we have to catch the ferry back to the mainland. We say farewell to our perfect hosts and head south towards our ferry terminal at Armadale on the Slate Peninsula. It will take about 20 minutes to get down to the ferry, and you have to be there 20 minutes in advance of sailing to get the car on board and have tickets checked. About halfway down the road on the left-hand side, I point out a barely recognisable ruin. It's a good reason, by the way, for having an experienced Blue Badge guide with you. And this is the remains of Knock Castle. It consists of an old 15th century tower house or keep, and only one wall is standing. It was actually built by the MacLeods, but later captured by the MacDonalds. Of course, I've discussed in depth the animosity between the two clans in my previous podcasts on Tours of Skye, so if you want more on that, then please refer back to my previous podcasts. By 1689 the castle was abandoned, and thereafter most of the stones were used for the building of nearby dwellings. Tradition has it that a green lady haunts the castle, and it's not recommended to go there late at night. Certainly not alone. A little further on we pass a gateway to a higher education college whose sole medium of instruction on degree courses is Scottish Gaelic. This is called Sabal Mor Ostaig, or Great Barn of Ostaig. It was established in 1973, and the college is a large modern white building built right on the coast overlooking the Sound of Slate. Fabulous outlook and easily visible from the ferry that plies its way between Skye and the mainland. The college has played a crucial role in the linguistic and cultural renaissance of Gaelic in Scotland. Well, before we know it, we've arrived at the ferry terminal at Armadale and get into the queue for the ferry. There are a number of exquisite little shops near the terminus, and I always enjoy popping into the Bay Pottery, which is located a short stroll from the ferry terminal. The owner, Maggie Zarafa, is a real delight and always gives a very warm welcome to visitors or browsers into her shop and workshop. She sells some really wonderful stoneware pottery, ranging from huge platters and bottles to amazing little tableware in designs that you will not see elsewhere. More often than not, you will catch Maggie at her pottery wheel, and it's a treat to see her most creative self. Well, we're back at the car, and the ferry pulls in with a great clanking sound as the front ramp is lowered and scrapes along the sloping concrete slipway to the ferry. Incoming vehicles disembark, and I always get a feeling of sadness as I see the newcomers arrive, signalling my departure from Skye. We move forward and the car slides easily onto the huge metal ramp and up onto the deck of the ferry. Once we're parked, we get out of the car and go up on deck to watch the short crossing of 25 minutes to the fishing port of Mallaig, or Mallaig, on the mainland. It's a good crossing today and the wind is light. I've had a few hairy crossings with the wind whipping up the waves and heavy sea spray splashing up over the guardrails of the open deck, but today, thankfully, it's calm. And as we pull away from Skye, I look back, and up on the side of a hill and overlooking the sea is the sizable ruin of Armadale Castle. There's a large dark stone building with castellated square towers either side of what is an opening and entrance, and to the right a smaller white building, and as it happens, this smaller white building is the original house that was destroyed in a fire and dates from the late 18th century. The larger ruin, the castle itself, was built in the 19th century and would, once upon a time, have been a fabulous country mansion designed to make it look similar to an older castle. Armadale Castle and Gardens are at the heart of a 20,000-acre working Highland estate, and there's also a museum in the grounds showing the history of Clan Donald that exercised a hugely powerful influence on the Highland history for almost 400 years. Indeed, the clan, from a stronghold on the island of Islay, called Finlagan, ruled the western seaboard of Scotland, controlling an empire powerful enough to challenge the Scottish kings. The clan leaders called themselves the Lords of the Isles, a title they held until 1493, when it was forfeited to the Scottish crown, King James IV, and he gave the title to his son and heir, the Prince of Wales. Well, this title continues to be used by the heir to the throne today. As Skye and the castle recede into the distance, I reflect upon the powerful Clan Donald, which remains the largest clan in Scotland, and, with the large number of MacDonalds who emigrated, probably one of the largest clans in the world. But I now look forward to arriving at the small fishing village of Mallaig, and before we arrive, to the south I can see the island of Eigg, one of a group of islands known as the Small Isles, and to the north the mountains on the Knoydart Peninsula. As the ferry pulls into the enclosed harbour of Mallaig, we can see a row of houses up on the hill, and then the small town itself, and as I scan the harbour, it's full of small fishing vessels, and on the other side of the harbour I can see the slipway of a small boatyard and a fishing vessel up out of the water under repair. As I continue to scan around the town, I can just make out the train station, the terminus to the Fort William and Mallaig line. The town grew considerably on the back of this train service when it was introduced in the 19th century, when only a handful of people would have lived here. Well, today the town itself has a population of just under 1,000 people, and yet in the summer it's always buzzing as people flock here to join the ferry to Skye. It's funny, when the Skye Bridge just to the north of here was opened in 1995, it was thought that the ferry would probably have to close due to the reduced traffic requirement. Well, it seems that crossing the sea to Skye by boat is still very much in vogue, and if you want to travel by ferry to Skye in the summer, then I do recommend that you book ahead, as they're generally all full. In reality, the town of Mallaig is not that old. It was founded in the 1840s when Lord Lovat, of the Fraser clan, who owned a huge tract of the Morar estate, and that's the land local to the present-day Mallaig, got involved in the infamous clearances, which removed tenants from the more fertile land and encouraged them to the less fertile coastal areas to turn them into fishermen. That's not an easy transition for some who had been farming the land of their forefathers for hundreds of years. Now, I'm not having a go at Lord Lovat, as he was only one of many landowners in Scotland that were involved in this appalling clearance practice. Indeed, my own clan Mackay suffered terribly in the glens and straths of Mackay country to the far north of Scotland, where the Sutherlands evicted whole communities to make way for the new money in Scotland in the 18th and 19th century: sheep. Anyway, back to the present day. Reverie over, and we have to get down to the car deck to get into our cars. We leave the ferry eventually and arrive in the car park next to the town, and we're going to stop here for lunch before my guests catch the afternoon train, the Hogwarts Express. It will take them to Fort William, and I'll pick them up again later on, in about an hour and a half. As we take the short 10 minutes walk into town, we can see the railway line quite clearly. One of the new diesel trains, provide the standard service to Fort William, is waiting to depart. The town itself is a cluster of restaurants, gift shops, a bank and a small supermarket. It's quite quaint. The local fish and chips are superb, and I recommend a local ice cream to top it off. There's a seating area outside to enjoy your ice cream, but hang on to it because the seagulls are the size of elephants and have no fear of dive bombing and grabbing anything that's not protected. Personally, for lunch, I often pop into the West Highland Hotel and the Terrace restaurant 2 minutes up from the main street, which has fabulous views from the conservatory. On a clear day you can see the Slate Peninsula on Skye and the islands of Eigg, Rum and Canna that I mentioned before, and they make up these small isles. The location of the hotel makes it the perfect place to stay, with just a 5-minute walk from the station and ferry port. The views from the terrace are superb, and being above the town it's quieter and is not so affected by the noise of this busy port. I enjoy eating here, as the food is sourced locally, and the seafood, in the middle of a fishing harbour, could not be more fresh. Well, as I relax on the hotel terrace, I look down to the sea, and I can see the small isles, and I reflect visits to both Rum and Eigg. The island of Rum has a lovely 19th century mansion called Kinloch Castle, and it's got quite a story to tell. It was built by Sir George Bulloch, a textile tycoon from Lancashire, as a summer residence and shooting estate, but it became synonymous with a bohemian and rather ostentatious lifestyle, where loud, outrageous parties were the order of the day, witnessed by many who could hear the party music and ribaldry from around Loch Skrizort, where the castle is situated. It's deserted today, and it's sad to see such a marvellous building starting to decay. Well, as I reflect on this while eating my Culloden skink soup, the sound of a train whistle reminds me that I have to get my guest to the station in the next half hour to board the Hogwarts Express. Mallaig has been used a number of times as a film location, but the most famous connection is with the Harry Potter series. The steam train was actually used in the film, and the Glenfinnan viaduct that I'll pass on my way to Fort William was the scene where the train was filmed. I remember once standing on the station telling some guests how much fun they were going to have travelling on the Hogwarts Express, when the driver stuck his head out of the steam engine cabin and shouted, "The Jacobite Express!" Oops, I had hit a nerve. He was quite right, of course. The official name for the train is the Jacobite Express, but once he'd stuck his head back into the coal pit of the engine, I said quietly, "Let's compromise and call it the Harry Potter Express." Well, we make our way down to the station, and the steam train is sitting there in all its glory. You can't help but be impressed by the steam-enveloped, extremely noisy, beautiful, gargantuan, hissing brute. It's marvellous, and we join a throng of people on the platform waiting to board the train. People from all over flock to see the beast of a bygone age, and the station is also full of those not travelling but have turned up just to get a glimpse. I know that as I leave my guests and drive to Fort William to meet them, every lay-by and cutting along the train's route will be filled by numerous people just waiting to see and perhaps photograph this famous train. Well, if you go to my website at exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk in the media video section, you can see a short video clip that I shot last year when the train was passing over the Glenfinnan viaduct. Of course, when the Mallaig Fort William line was opened in 1901, steam trains would have been the norm, but steam services were withdrawn in 1967 in favour of diesel trains. In 1995, with the privatisation of British Rail, West Coast Railways began operating the service under the Jacobite name. It's named after the Jacobite historical movement, and more of that shortly. The carriages that the train pulls are the old-style carriages that were prevalent during the steam age and are very in keeping with the service. To get out, you have to lower the window and turn the handle. Very quaint. Well, my guests board the train in great excitement and take their seats. They've chosen first class, so have a separate compartment to themselves, and they'll be served tea and coffee and biscuits during the journey to Fort William. Once they've settled in, I explain what it is to look out for on the journey. It's considered to be part of the most scenic rail journey in the world along the West Highland Line, with mountains and lochs to see, and plentiful wildlife and purple heather-coloured hills. They'll pass by Morar and its white sandy beaches, yet another iconic cinematic location, Loch Aelort and Elt, and the pièce de résistance is the Glenfinnan Viaduct, probably the most famous piece of rail track in the world, after being used in the Harry Potter film as Harry and his friends made their way to Hogwarts School. Well, another whistle from the train's steam engine signals their impending departure. So I say goodbye, and we'll see them again in about an hour and a half on their arrival in Fort William. I depart the train to collect the car, and await by the side of the road, not far from the station, waiting the train's departure. Eventually, the departing signal, and the train is on the move. It takes time for the train to wind up and get moving, and as it passes me, the speed is starting to increase. I see my guests through the train window and they wave excitedly from their compartment. I wave back and make my way by road to Fort William. It will only take me an hour to get there, so I'll be in place on their arrival. But before then, I'll take 20 minutes out to visit a most important historical site, Glenfinnan, the valley that gave the famous train viaduct its name. The term Glen means a valley, and Glenfinnan encloses Loch Shiel, a fresh water loch which is about 17.5 miles long and is the fourth longest in Scotland. The surrounding highlands are picturesque, but rarely climbed as they do not qualify as Munros or mountains over 3,000 feet. Standing at the edge of the loch is a 60 feet or 18 metres monument called the Glenfinnan Monument. It was built in 1815 and it commemorates the raising of a standard by Bonnie Prince Charlie, who was the young pretender, who raised his standard to signal the start of the Jacobite rising to take the crown of Great Britain from the ruling monarchy and give it to his father, James VIII, who was in exile in Italy. The monument's a large round tower made from stone and has a large statue of an anonymous Highlander on top. This represents all the Highlanders who gave their lives in a cause to return what they thought was the rightful king to the throne. James VII, or Jacobus in Latin, thus his followers were called Jacobites, had been kicked off the throne in 1689 in favour of King William of Orange. The English Parliament had taken umbrage to James VII's Catholicism and his belief in his divine right to rule, so this man and grandson of James VII, this young upstart, the wee Italian Niaf, as Billy Connolly called him, in the form of Prince Charles Edward Stuart, or Bonnie Prince Charlie as he was known, decided to take matters into his own hands and return the crown to his father. It's quite a story, but that's for another podcast, another day, and I now leave Glenfinnan on the road to Fort William. Before I leave, I look once more down the glen, showing well-wooded hillsides and bare mountain summits, rising steeply from a fjord-type loch. It's stunning, and it's easy to see why this view has been used in so many films and photo shoots. As I leave Glenfinnan, the road winds around the mountain sides, but it's only 5 minutes later that I see on my right-hand side Loch Eel opening up. This is a sea loch and connects with Loch Linney through a narrow passage at Fort William, and I'm always in awe of such a large loch this far inland, being connected with another sea loch that is connected with the Atlantic. And this is how medieval man would have travelled so far in Scotland long before roads were built. The lochs and the rivers were the motorways of the past, and Scotland, with so many waterways, was readily accessible. The chief of Clan Cameron at the time of Prince Charles's rising was called John Cameron of Loch Eel, and he was pivotal in supporting the prince when so many others turned away from the uprising. He stuck with him to the end, including the bloody battle at Culloden, when the Jacobites were routed. John Cameron was seriously wounded, but he escaped to France in September 1746 and lived there until his end. I arrive at Fort William Station as the train is pulling in. My guests alight and are overtaken by some young lads running excitedly along the platform, black cloaks streaming behind them and waving their make-believe Harry Potter wands. Well, they thoroughly enjoyed the short but epic train journey and agreed that the scenery was spectacular. However, it's getting late and it's now time for the short 15-minute journey to their overnight accommodation. The hotel I've selected for them is the outstanding Inverlochy Castle Hotel, just outside Fort William, where a cream tea awaits. It's the place that Queen Victoria stayed in 1873 when she was on her way to Balmoral. Inverlochy Castle Hotel is a beautiful 19th century castle surrounded by trees and overlooked by the Nevis Range Mountains, Ben Nevis being the highest mountain in the United Kingdom. The cream tea with freshly baked scones and cream sourced locally is superb, and the only argument is whether the cream goes onto the scone first or the jam. I'm a jam first man, but each to their own. And for dinner, there's a real treat in store. Dining at Albert and Michael Roux, Jr. at Inverlochy Castle is a culinary experience to savour, with a legendary father and son taking the helm of the kitchen and offering the finest dishes using local produce. I've stayed at Inverlochy a number of times and have never been disappointed. I know that my guests are in good hands, and I can leave them to enjoy the delights of this wonderful place. Well, we've come to the end of our tour from Skye to Fort William. It was fun taking the ferry to Mallaig, then my guests enjoying the delights of the Jacobite or Hogwarts Express. It's been a great trip and I've enjoyed taking you with me on this short journey. It's always sad to leave the Misty Isle, but I now look forward to continuing my journey with you around much more of Scotland. This podcast is one of my touring Scotland trilogies, and this is the third, so if you've enjoyed this journey and would like to hear my previous tours, you can find them on my website at exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. In my next podcast, I'm going to take you on a tour from Loch Lomond to the Trossachs, an area of natural beauty in the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park. Before I go, I want to remind you that many of the places that I mention in all my podcasts can be seen on the website. You can also listen to the usual channels such as Spotify, Google, TuneIn or Apple under my brand name Unique Scotland. I've visited all the other places I talk about and have put up some lovely photographs of those places on my website, so do have a look. Also, please do get in touch if there's any subject you'd like me to cover, or if you just want to say hi, or if you've got a question about any of the podcasts that I've recorded in the last few months. Well, it's time to sign off, and as I relax in the sumptuous surrounding of Inverloch Castle Hotel, I'd like to raise my glass to you, wherever you are, and give you the Gaelic toast, Slán Java.
You've been listening to the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusive scottishvisits.co.uk. To receive all our episodes automatically, please subscribe now.